Secrets do not sleep. They spread. They slipped through cracks. By night, there were murmurs in the city. By dawn, the press had seized it. Television anchors whispered with wide eyes. Newspaper presses thundered through the night. By morning, the headlines screamed, DNA confirms truth about Prince Andrew. The claimant, the one who had carried the burden for years, finally breathed in release. Tears ran freely. I knew, they whispered, voice breaking. I always knew. It was not just a victory. It was freedom. The years of doubt, the ridicule, the quiet dismissal, all erased by a single test. Their truth now stood written in science. The nation staggered under the weight. Is this real? A presenter asked on live television. A royal secret confirmed by DNA. In cafes, in buses, in homes, the same question echoed. Some gasped. Some shook their heads. Some simply whispered, I am not surprised. But in Buckingham Palace, silence reigned. No statement came. No denial. No defense. The walls that once felt strong now trembled like paper. Andrew's name, once heavy with honor, now carried only scandal. For Andrew, the fall was sharp. Friends described him, pale, withdrawn, avoiding eyes, his shoulders bent under the weight. He looked like a man whose world had fallen apart. One confidant admitted he could not believe it was out, and that nothing could take it back. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates, some angry, some sorrowful, others simply curious. Placards were raised, voices lifted, and the words echoed in unison. The truth is out. Inside, the family moved quietly, each step heavy. Some felt pity, others felt anger, but all knew the same truth. This was not only Andrew's burden. It had struck at the heart of the monarchy itself. The damage is done, a royal insider said softly. The truth cannot be hidden again. For Andrew, there was no escape. He withdrew deeper in his silence, carrying the weight of a truth too heavy to bear. And so, the story of a prince was undone, not by swords or wars, but by something smaller than sight itself. A single strand of DNA had changed everything. With the truth out, the monarchy is shaken. How did they handle the fallout? Let's dive into it. When the crown trembled, the news struck like thunder. Screens lit up with headlines. Voices filled the streets, and whispers rose into shouts across the kingdom. Yet behind the palace gates, the air was heavier. It was not just gossip now. It was family. When the DNA truth reached the royal heart, silence fell. Not a peaceful silence, but one that pressed on the chest, thick and cold. The result was clear. The whispers that had circled Prince Andrew for years were no longer whispers. They were facts. If Queen Elizabeth lived to hear it, the pain was sharp. She had borne her children's burdens with dignity, covering wounds with a calm face. But this truth pierced deeper. My son, she whispered to her aide, her eyes lowered. Her voice was not angry. It was heavy, tiring, and filled with sorrow. For her, the scandal was not just personal. It was a shadow over the throne she had guarded all her life. But since the moment came after her passing, the burden fell on King Charles. His whole life had been preparation for leadership, for guiding the crown through storms. Yet now, his brother's truth tested him more than he expected. This is not his alone, he told an advisor quietly. This is ours, and it cuts to the heart of the family. For Charles, it was a question of survival. How to stand firm without cruelty. How to protect the monarchy without breaking the family apart. His face was drawn, his words measured. But when he spoke to his council, his tone carried weight. We cannot remain silent. The crown must stand above scandal. But silence had already cracked inside the family. Prince William's anger was plain. For years, he had worked to protect the dignity of the monarchy, shaping his life with Catherine around duty and trust. Now, his uncle's scandal felt like betrayal. It taints us all, he muttered to her in private, his jaw set. And it will not stop. To William, the result was more than a family wound. It was an attack on the future he had promised to carry. Prince Harry, though far from the palace, felt the tremor. Distance could not erase blood. He spoke softly to Meghan, his voice heavy. No matter where we are, it follows. We cannot escape the family name. His words carried both sorrow and resignation. For him, the truth was a reminder that the past always finds its way back. The brothers carried their emotions differently. William with anger, Harry with weary acceptance. But both knew the same truth. Andrew's scandal touched them all. In the storm, Camilla stood steady. She knew whispers. She had survived years of them. She leaned close to Charles with calm words. Do not let this consume the crown. It is a wound, yes, but must not be the whole story. Her counsel was gentle, but her firmness anchored the king. Where others wavered, she reminded them of strength. But Andrew himself stood with no anchor. Invitations faded. Calls slowed. Faces turned cold. He was not only a man confirmed by DNA. He was a prince stripped by truth. He is alone now. One insider said, the family speaks of duty, but not of him. He has become a shadow. The palace began its hard work. Could Andrew remain with titles? Could he continue public duties? Or must he step further away, hidden where scandal could not stain the throne? Charles knew the decision would cut deep. Every choice is bitter, he confessed, pacing, but silence will destroy us. Behind locked doors, words grew sharp. William urged action. Harry pleaded for care. Camilla urged balance. And Charles carried the burden of final judgment. Brother to Andrew, but king to a nation. Stripped of all military titles and royal charity roles. A royal source says he will also lose the use of his title, His Royal Highness. Beyond the gates, the people waited. Their voices were no longer whispers. They demanded answers. Would Andrew fall completely, or would the crown endure once again? Scarred but standing, the scandal had shaken more than a man. It had touched the monarchy itself. And within the palace walls, sorrow, anger, and silence battled for control. While Andrew, once a prince of promise, now walked alone in the shadows of truth. When the world became the jury, the truth was no longer a whisper. It came like thunder, shaking walls that had stood for centuries. From the moment the DNA results were revealed, the world did not wait. It shouted. Headlines burned across screens. DNA confirms Prince Andrew's secret. Some called it betrayal. Others said tragedy. A few, without kindness, named it disgrace. On the streets of London, newspapers vanished from stands before midday. Talk shows repeated the story like a broken record. One presenter gasped, "This is not gossip. This is history unfolding before our eyes." In cafes, strangers leaned across tables as though they were jurors. "I always knew," one woman said outside Buckingham Palace. Whispers don't last this long unless there is truth. Yet another voice, softer, tried to defend. "He is still human," an older man told the cameras. "He is a father, a son. The weight on him must be crushing." But social media showed no such mercy. Twitter filled with fury. DNA doesn't lie. The crown does. Memes spread faster than royal guards could move. On TikTok, young voices turned the scandal into reenactments, mocking what once felt untouchable. Across the oceans, the voices grew louder. In New York, a woman stared at the camera. "It feels like betrayal. Royals are supposed to carry dignity. What do we see? Scandal." In Sydney, a man shook his head. One DNA test, and centuries of mystery fall apart. Even in small villages, radios buzzed. Farmers, shopkeepers, and teachers argued about a prince as though he were their neighbor. The story had crossed borders, leaving no corner untouched. Some called for mercy. A priest's words echoed on television. "Truth must be faced, but let us not destroy a man without compassion." Others demanded punishment. A politician's voice rang out. "Strip the titles. The monarchy cannot stand above truth." And where was Andrew? Every step was hunted, every picture magnified. A blurry image of him behind a window filled screens. "Look at him," one reporter whispered. "He looks broken." Yet the fascination did not fade. It grew. Documentaries were promised. Books were drafted. The same people who condemned him devoured every detail of his fall. A mother in Paris confessed, "I feel betrayed, but I cannot stop watching. It is like a tragedy we cannot look away from." The voices did not stop. Some cried, some mocked, some raged, but none were silent. And over it all hung one question, heavy and sharp. Can a prince ever escape the judgment of the people? Let's find out. A prince against the mirror. The world had already judged him. But behind the closed doors of his chambers, the heavier battle was not with the headlines. It was with himself. Prince Andrew stood in silence, staring at the reflection that no longer felt familiar. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his once proud shoulders bent under the invisible weight of truth. "The test does not define me," he whispered, almost as if speaking aloud might make it real, or unreal, at once. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same words written in black and white. DNA confirmed. In public, he chose silence. No statements, no defenses, no confessions. But in private, silence was shattered by waves of denial and moments of despair. At times, he clenched his fists, telling himself it was all wrong. That mistakes could happen. "It cannot be true," he muttered as he paced the room, convincing himself that error, not certainty, was to blame. Other nights, however, his denial broke apart, and he sat in the dark with tears he could not hide. Alone, with no audience, no cameras, and no sympathy. He was not a prince, but man undone. "What have I become?" he asked the empty room, though no answer ever came. Loneliness wrapped around him like a cloak. The phone that once rang with constant invitations now stayed silent. Old friends, cautious and afraid, kept their distance. Even within the palace walls, footsteps seemed quieter, voices more careful. He felt it in every glance, the shift from respect to pity. And yet, he fought to hold on to dignity, if only in fragments. He walked with his head high in the rare moments he stepped outside, forcing himself to keep the composure of Prince. But behind that mask lay the truth he could not escape. The world no longer saw him as he once was. The struggle between denial and acceptance tore him daily. One moment, he was the son of a queen, the man who once wore uniforms and carried medals with pride. The next, he was simply Andrew, a man trapped by blood, by scandal, by the relentless truth of DNA. And though he still tried to resist, deep down he knew no denial could rewrite the story, and no silence could erase the truth that had already been spoken. But the story doesn't end there. With Andrew at a rough place, the palace has to adapt. Watch closely so that you won't miss the new wave for the monarchy. Prince Andrew has long lived under the shadow of secrets, whispers, and doubts. For years, the public speculated about hidden truths behind his private life. And now, a revelation has finally surfaced. A DNA test has delivered the answer many feared, confirming what countless rumors had suggested all along. This is not just another royal headline. It is a dramatic turning point that could change everything. The results leave no room for denial, no space for excuses, only raw truth staring back. As one insider put it, the evidence speaks louder than words. Join us to find out the truth. The hidden face of a prince. It did not begin with light. It began with shadows that seemed to cling to him from the very start. His name was never free of whispers, never safe from doubt. To the world outside, he once stood tall, handsome, charming, the image of strength. But behind palace doors, questions grew. Now, with a single test, those questions had been forced into the open. A DNA test had spoken. It carried the kind of truth rumor could never claim. "It's undeniable," one voice murmured as the results were read. The blood told what the lips refused to say. Andrew's story, however, had roots long before laboratories and headlines. He was a boy raised in gilded halls, the queen's third child, never meant for a crown, but destined for notice. Andrew always had an energy, a family friend once said. It could brighten a room or set it alight. He was the favored son, the one who could make the queen smile when duty pressed too heavy. Her fondness became his shield, strong enough to hide his flaws. To the world, he was the dashing prince, the handsome officer with a daring smile, the naval pilot who flew with courage during the Falklands War. The only other time I really felt frightened was when we were invited to put on our anti-flash gear, which everybody's been talking about. You see everybody wearing it, the white, one recalled. Crowds cheered his bravery. Cameras adored him. For a time, he was a hero, but shadows never disappear. They wait for every headline of praise. There was a murmur of recklessness. For every photograph of laughter, there was a whisper of arrogance. His friendships, his nights out, his choices, they stirred unease, even within palace walls. What will become of Andrew? Some wondered, is he the strong prince we believe? Or is there something hidden? The distance between him and the public grew. The shine dulled. Rumors thickened. His name became linked not with honor, but with secrets that seemed too heavy to speak aloud. Then came the envelope, sealed, plain, ordinary. Yet inside, it was the power to end years of suspicion. When it was opened, the silence said everything. The science was clear. The whispers were no longer whispers. What does this mean for him? One aide asked quietly, eyes lowered. What doors has this opened? The results spread like fire. Streets buzzed, screens flashed, voices rose. No longer did people ask who Andrew was. The charming prince, the Navy hero, the Queen's favorite son. Now the question was sharper, heavier, and inescapable. What truth had he been hiding all along? And so the whispers grew into theories, but the truth isn't distant. Stay tuned. The rumors that never slept. They did not shout. They did not march. They crept. They lingered. Whispers became the shadows that followed Prince Andrew wherever he went, year after year, clinging to him no matter how tightly the palace doors tried to shut them out. Why does his name always return a scandal? A journalist once asked. Even when stories faded, his name returned, carried by rumors that refused to rest. At first, they were simple tales, late nights, fleeting romances, women drawn to the charm of a smiling prince. But some whispers grew heavier. Prince Andrew and the businessman and convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We know Prince Andrew got to know Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s. Darker stories spread of a child beyond the palace gates, a child of his blood, though not of his name. The palace met every whisper with silence. It was their shield. Editors who tried to chase the story spoke of sudden walls. It was like chasing smoke, one recalled. Every time we reached for the truth, it vanished. Headlines promised revelations, then disappeared overnight. Stories were buried as if swept away by unseen hands. Still, the whispers lived. They moved in taverns, in drawing rooms, and newsrooms. People leaned close, speaking softly of secrets never spoken aloud. If the palace fights so hard to deny it, some said, maybe that's because it's true. For Andrew, the whispers became a part of him. Once he was called dashing, a Navy hero, the Queen's bright son. But admiration turned to suspicion. Respect shifted into doubt. He became a man whose presence carried an unspoken question, one that no denial could erase. Where there's smoke, there's fire, one commentator remarked. And with Andrew, the smoke never cleared. Decades passed. New names appeared. New stories rose. But the heart of the rumor stayed the same. Somewhere, perhaps, a hidden heir walked in silence. Andrew denied it, but his words fell flat, cold, rehearsed. It was as if even he knew silence spoke louder than protest. The whispers became legend, circling him like a storm. They needed no proof to survive. They lived because people believed they carried weight. The world waited, listening for the moment when truth would break free. And then it came, not from rumors, not from gossip, but from science. A DNA test. Unyielding, undeniable paper that could silence the whispers or confirm them forever. It's just paper, an aide whispered, hands trembling. But it carries a storm, the claim that shook the palace. For years, the whispers circled, but never spoke in full voice. They floated like ghosts, unseen, untouchable, but never gone. And then, one day, a single voice cut through the fog. A person stepped forward, not in secrecy, but in the light of day, carrying a claim that no one could ignore. It was not a rumor anymore. It was not gossip. It was a direct challenge tied to the very name of Prince Andrew. The world held its breath. A woman, calm, determined, unshaken by fear, looked straight into the cameras and said what others had only dared to murmur. I have the right to know. The truth is in his blood, and I will not rest until it is revealed. Her words did not echo quietly. They exploded. Newspapers scrambled for front pages. Television screens lit up with breaking news. Headlines screamed a scandal. Was the Queen's son hiding a secret too heavy for even the palace walls? Was there truly a child outside the line of recognition? A truth buried for decades? The palace tried at first to dismiss it. Statements were issued in clipped tones, brushing the claim aside as nonsense. Spokesmen spoke of false accusations and baseless stories. Yet the firmness of denial sounded weaker than before. The world had heard this kind of dismissal too many times, and it was no longer enough. This time feels different, one commentator said. This time there's a voice, a face, a person willing to stand in the storm. And what a storm it became. The woman was not timid, not fragile, not afraid of the weight of crown. She carried herself with courage that made the public lean closer. She did not demand money. She did not seek fame. She asked only for one thing, proof. Proof through a test no one could deny. A DNA test will end this, she declared. If he is not the father, then let the truth show it. If he is, then let the world know. Her demand echoed louder than any palace denial. For once, the control had slipped from royal hands. The press camped outside gates. Reporters shouted questions into the air, and every glance toward Prince Andrew carried the same unspoken challenge. Will you take the test? Inside the palace walls, tension thickened. The Queen's household had weathered storms before, but this one cut deeper. Silence was no longer a shield. Every attempt to calm the fire only added fuel. The more they tried to push the claim aside, the stronger it grew. They thought they could bury it, a journalist whispered. But the woman would not be buried. Day after day, the story grew. Interviews spread. Talk shows dissected every detail. Commentators speculated about what the test could reveal. The people, once passive listeners of rumors, now demanded answers. Why not take the test if there is nothing to hide? The question burned across front pages and poured out of radio speakers. Andrew's image, already cracked, began to fracture further. For years, he had faced criticism. But this was different. This was not about friendships, not about scandals of conduct. This was about blood. This was about family. This was about truth that could not be silenced with denial alone. And so the tension built. Would he agree? Could he refuse? Every path led to danger. If he took the test, and it confirmed the claim, his name would be forever altered. If he refused, the world would take silence as admission. There was no safe choice. Sometimes silence is louder than words, said one royal watcher. And in this case, silence will sound like guilt. The palace scrambled, desperate to contain the fire. Advisors debated, lawyers prepared, and statements were carefully crafted. But none of it stopped the roar outside the gates. The people no longer wanted explanations. They wanted proof. The woman did not back down. Each day, she repeated her demand with calm certainty. This is not about destroying him, she said softly. This is about knowing the truth. Her words carried a strange sweetness, an honesty that disarmed many who listened. She did not sound vengeful. She did not sound cruel. She sounded like someone seeking only what was right, and that made her harder to dismiss. As days turned to weeks, the palace faced a storm it could not silence. Journalists unearthed old rumors, tied them to this new claim, and painted a picture too heavy to ignore. Andrew's every move was tracked, his every word dissected. The pressure pressed tighter, each headline a fresh wound, each broadcast a reminder that the world was watching. And through it all, one question grew louder and louder. Will Andrew agree to the DNA test? Stay with us to find out. The test that no one expected. The demand had been made. The world had heard it. And now the weight of it pressed down like a storm cloud ready to break. A DNA test, so simple in science, so final in meaning, was the one thing Prince Andrew could no longer avoid. It was the test that could silence the whispers forever or bring them roaring into truth. And for the first time, the walls of the palace felt too thin to keep the storm out. It is only a swab, one scientist explained, but that swab carries the power to change history. Arranging the test was no ordinary matter. This was not a doctor's office appointment, not a routine sample taken in daylight. This was secrecy wrapped in layers of caution. Trusted hands were chosen. Laboratories cleared and protocols tightened until there was no room for doubt. The sample would be collected under strict supervision, sealed in containers marked and witnessed, transported with more care than jewels. Every step had to be precise, every movement accounted for. There could be no accusations of tampering, no shadows of manipulation. The world was watching too closely. Behind the palace gates, tension grew with every hour. Advisors whispered in corridors. Lawyers drafted possibilities, and the royal family moved with silence, so deep it echoed louder than words. There were no smiles, no reassurances, only the unspoken awareness that this test could not be undone. Outside, the media frenzy burned hotter each day. Cameras lined the streets. Reporters pressed microphones toward every crack in the royal shield. A brand new media village has sprung up as 8,000 journalists from all around the world get ready. The question repeated endlessly across headlines and broadcasts. What will the DNA reveal? Some called it the trial of blood. Others, the truth in a vial. It was no longer about rumors. It was about science, and science does not bend to power. The day of collection arrived in quietness that felt heavier than noise. A private room, guarded and cleared, became the setting. No ceremony, no grandeur, just a chair, a table, and the tools of truth. The man who once carried the pride of the queen now sat in stillness, the weight of decades pressing down. "Open your mouth, please," the medical officer said gently. It was done in seconds. A swab across the cheek, a container sealed, a signature written. So small, so quick, yet carrying the force of thunder. For Andrew, it was the moment where silence could no longer protect him. His blood, his code, his truth, captured in sterile cotton. The samples were dispatched immediately, guarded as though they were treasures. Couriers carried them through the night, watched, logged, and verified at every stop. They traveled not like evidence, but like destiny itself. And as they moved, the world waited. The laboratories where the test would unfold were locked to outsiders. Behind closed doors, experts prepared. Machines stood ready. Scientists moved with careful hands, and every procedure was double-checked. There could be no flaw, no question of error. What was at stake demanded perfection. DNA does not lie. One geneticist said, "It carries history, truth, and identity. It cannot be persuaded. It cannot be bribed, and it cannot be silenced." While the work began, the outside world boiled with anticipation. Newspapers sold in millions. Television debates stretched into hours, and every social gathering turned to the same question. Will the test confirm what has been whispered for years? The silence from Buckingham Palace only deepened the tension. No statement, no denial, no acknowledgement, just silence. As if every member of the family knew that nothing they could say would matter until the result was revealed. For Andrew, isolation thickened. Friends described him as withdrawn, moving from room to room in quiet unease, eyes distant, lips pressed tightly shut. He knew, one insider whispered, that his life could change with a single line on a paper. The stakes could not have been higher. If the test cleared him, it would not erase all shadows, but it would close one door that had haunted him for decades. If the test confirmed the claim, then history itself would bend, and his name would carry a weight that no title could shield. This is not just about a man. One commentator said, "It is about a monarchy, an image, a legacy, and it all depends on a few strands of DNA." Days passed, but the wait felt like years. Each sunrise brought headlines sharper than the last. Each evening ended with speculation louder than before. The world sat on the edge of its seat, caught between disbelief and expectation. And then the test was complete. The data had been read, the comparisons made, the conclusion drawn. Somewhere, in a sealed envelope, sat the truth that could not be hidden anymore. When the truth finally spoke, the envelope sat on the table like a shadow, plain, sealed, and quiet. And yet inside it waited a truth strong enough to shake crowns. For days, the world had circled around this moment. The air was tight, the silence heavy, every heartbeat slower than the last. "It's just paper," an aide whispered, though his hand shook. "But it carries a storm." The seal broke, and the storm rose. Inside were only words, yet they struck harder than thunder. Officials read them first, their faces stiff with disbelief. Lawyers leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the page. The lines were short, clear, and without escape. The match was certain. The whispers had ended. The rumors had become fact. Prince Andrew was confirmed. In the palace, the words landed like stones. Messengers spoke softly, almost afraid to breathe. "No," one aide murmured, shaking his head. "It cannot be." But it was. Silence filled the queen's household. The truth, once locked away, now moved like fire through dry grass.